You ready?
I am ready.
Okay, here we go. So five, four, three, two, and one. All right, folks, welcome back to the podcast. Very excited to have back Linda Thai. Linda, welcome.
It's a pleasure to be back here with you and all of your listeners, Guy.
Awesome. So Linda is a trauma therapist, educator, and consultant. She's gifted with the capacity to contextualize, synthesize, and communicate complex and nuanced issues pertaining to trauma, attachment, and the nervous system, including the impact of oppressive systems upon identity, mental health, and well-being. Born in Vietnam, raised in Australia, and now living in Alaska, Linda is a former child refugee who's not only redefining what it means to be Vietnamese, to be Australian, and to be a United Statesian, she's also redefining what it means to be wounded and whole and a healer. Love that bio. Linda, great to see you again. Before we start out here, I mean, I pretty much said it in the bio, but share with the listeners where you're from originally and where you are currently.
So I was born in Vietnam and I'm a former child refugee. So after the fall of Saigon in 75, there were challenges living in Vietnam. And so in 79, my family fled. We made it to a refugee camp in Malaysia. We lived there for 6 months. My little sister was born in that refugee camp. We then made our way to Australia. We were sponsored out under a pilot rural resettlement scheme. And from there, I was raised in Australia. However, I never felt that sense of home. So I kept making concentric circles outwards in search of an outward place that would actually reflect and mirror how I felt about myself on the inside. And it was only when I discovered Alaska that I got that sense of, like this is where I'm supposed to live. This is how I'm supposed to live. And I always knew that how I live is so much more important than what I do. And so I have so much gratitude for being here today on the lands of the Dene Athabaskan peoples of the Middle Tanana Valley, where the land is big enough
Mhm.
to hold all of us, right, in terms of our own individual stuff, and has enough stillness that it can actually rattle and shake that which wants to emerge and be moved through on the inside.
Mm.
Mm.
That is amazing. I wish I could say I feel that about where I live right now, but you said right now you're experiencing a winter storm.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. Yeah, we've just had a snowstorm followed by an ice storm, followed by some more snow, followed by a windstorm. And it's unusual for up here, especially the freezing rain and the ice storm, because in interior Alaska where I am, usually it's too cold and too dry for it to snow.
Mm.
We're technically a desert. And so whether you call it the weather patterns or climate change, we've been getting warmer and more humid air over the last 10 years. And there has been increasing snowfall and increasing freezing rain, which is unusual for us. We're calling it the ice apocalypse because right freezing rain is black ice on the roads. It's kind of
Hmm.
dangerous.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
definitely.
Mm.
All right, look, so we're here to talk about really specifically something you're doing with a presentation you're giving to the Trauma Wisdom Circle, which is with under Academy of Therapy Wisdom, which is a phenomenal sponsor of this podcast. I'm so excited that they're sponsoring my podcast and I get to interview you. But before we get to that, I want, if we can, if you can provide just a little snippet, thumbnail of how you got to this place. Because Linda, look, before we even say anything, you exude, and I know I said this to you before, you exude a groundedness, a compassion. Uh, you exude that. And uh, how did you get? Because hearing your background, I mean, a lot of us can think of, oh my God, oh my God.
Mhm.
So Yeah.
Yes, my life was that. I had my own struggles with addiction. The aftermath of the impact of forced displacement upon myself and my family was pretty tough for us to navigate. And somewhere in my mid-30s, I discovered the body keeps a score. I discovered yoga and meditation only a few years before that, which actually provided me enough capacity to be able to take in the wealth of information that was in the body keeps a score, because it helped me to make sense of myself and my life. And so my own journey through addiction recovery and trauma recovery, which was really based upon meditation and yoga before I then studied IFS and sensory-motor psychotherapy and somatic experiencing and brain spotting and like all of these modalities that really are so foundational to trauma therapy these days. Like studying those trainings actually was a huge part of my own healing journey as well. And so but there was this elusive piece around attachment, like an elusive piece around attachment. And I was ever so fortunate to study with Bessel van der Kolk and Leisha Sky in terms of studying their form of psychodrama structures, which Bessel studied with Al Peso, where it's really about somatic symbolic reparenting. And that really did help me to repair my attachment template with my parents. And
So,
yet prior,
excuse me,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
somatic, symbolic reparenting.
Yes, I got a new attachment template in my body.
Mm.
Yeah, through individuals who would take on roles to play the roles of my real parents and the role of my ideal parents. And the first task of grief is coming to terms with reality. So putting your real parents or your real life out there in three-dimensional space helped me to move the grief that was there, and then to experience ideal parents who would hold me and touch me and sing to me and look at me in the ways in which my real parents didn't and couldn't back then, helped
Mhm.
my body and my nervous system to experience what it would have been like and could have been like in such a way that imprinted, so that I then moved through the world as if I had have had secure
Mm.
attachment back then. And so my life actually pivoted on a dime. And yet I know that this modality isn't accessible or available to everyone. And there was this big period of attachment theory is great. It's
Mhm.
helped me to make sense of my life, but I needed something to help me to repair the rift between myself and my parents that happened as a result of circumstances that were forced upon us. And so that's where the work that I'm putting out in the world in terms of a more expansive conceptualization of secure attachment then arises. Yeah. Um, so that's the nutshell answer of the of the how is Linda Ty so
Okay.
committed and
Beautiful.
grounded.
I appreciate that. Did you move into this in what it sounds like intense study with the purpose of becoming a teacher, or was it to like I got to heal myself?
It was the latter. It
Yeah.
was, yeah, and it was this thread that was just compelling me forward. Like I knew that for myself, it didn't matter what else I did in my lifetime. It was healing myself that was of utmost priority and importance. And if anything, doing other things would be a distraction from
Hmm.
from doing that work. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So let's start talking about the presentation you're going to do with the Wisdom Circle. Now, let me ask you this. Let me just
Mhm.
pause here. Are you on a laptop?
Yes, I am.
Can you tilt
And
it more down so we decrease the space?
uh, I'm on a laptop, but there's a cell phone that's being used
Okay.
as my as my camera.
Oh, interesting.
What I'm going to
Okay.
do is I'm going to sit a little bit higher
Oh,
up.
that'll work.
Yeah.
Okay, so want to cut your head off.
Yeah. Is
Okay.
that,
Yeah, that's
yeah.
perfect.
Okay.
So, wow. Um, okay. So say again
Yeah.
this piece about attachment and your need
Yeah.
for that and bringing that out into the world, if you could.
Yes. Um, I got a lot of benefit out of learning about attachment theory and what happens with disrupted attachment. However, there were two things. One, it didn't do much to help me repair my relationship with my parents. And secondly, my symptoms didn't match the attachment history. And so that was where I then learned about racialized trauma and the ways in which racialized trauma can look exactly like disorganized attachment.
Mm,
However, if we don't know that as clinicians, we actually end up mispathologizing, or we actually end up misdiagnosing and pathologizing our clients because we're hyper focused on the dyadic relationship between the parent and the child and how that expresses as symptoms later on in life. So
mhm.
there was that one piece which I felt I needed to talk more about and share more about into the clinical world. And then the second piece is, you know, how do we offer our clients a more expansive conceptualization of secure attachment beyond the hyper focus on the dyadic relationship between the parent and the child in such a way that can help to repair the relationship between the parent and the child?
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
So, what is your presentation going to be? Having said all that, what are you going to
Yes.
focus
Yeah.
on with this wisdom circle presentation?
So the first part of it is talking about what does secure attachment mean in a world whose systems and institutions offer pervasive messages and messaging of insecurity, which actually impacts all of us. Yeah. So to expand beyond the hyper focus on the dyad. So an example from our industries earlier on this year, there was the big disruption around the cyber hacking of change management, which affected the billing systems for a lot of healthcare businesses, including clinicians who may use Change Healthcare as a clearinghouse for their billing. And so you can have great secure attachment with your parents, but in the face of the consistent messages of insecurity, yeah, and that you're not important,
Mhm.
and that we'll get around to you, but we're not getting around to you. And, weeks, months later, they're finally addressing it through messages that say, oh, by the way, if you sign this bit of paper, then we'll pay you a lump sum, but it'll actually be less than what we actually owe you. I mean, what
Mhm.
does that do to your sense of security and safety and coherence in the world? Yeah.
Right. I mean, and there are innumerable examples of that that we're being fed
Yes.
every
Yeah.
single day. And hopefully, I mean, to what, only we can only so much say, stop. I don't want to, that stuff is going to seep through and impact us.
Exactly.
And obviously, some of us are more susceptible to that too.
Exactly. If you hold a trans, non-binary, intersex identity, if you hold any, non-normative sexual expression in terms of your identity, um, if you're a person of the global majority living in the United States, then you are getting and have gotten over time messages and messaging of insecurity. And so it's great if you did have secure attachment with your parents.
Mhm.
However, you may be expressing in ways you may be expressing yourself in ways that can be misdiagnosed and pathologized as secure attachment. And we've got the ladder up against the wrong wall as clinicians.
Really
And so
interesting.
that's the first part of that's the one part of the presentation.
So in a way, not even in a way, it feels and seems like you're expounding on what the definition of secure attachment, what it means, what it looks like, what it could look like.
Yes, yes, yes. And then from there, we actually go into an expanded conceptualization of secure attachment, which can actually bring up a lot of complex grief for what we didn't get that we realize that we didn't get. So there's secure attachment with nature, secure attachment with ancestors, secure attachment with culture, secure attachment with with bodies and secure attachment with time. And so, if you like, Guy, I can break up each of these so that we can talk about it in some more detail.
Yeah, yeah, let's do that. Or let's pick two.
Okay.
Let's
Okay.
pick a couple. Yeah.
Sure.
Or
So, um, secure attachment with nature, right? That's being and living in synchrony with the natural environment around you so that you're aware of the season, right? As an embodied sensorial experience in your body, that you have a connection with your food and where your food comes from, that you know the cycles of the moon and of the sun and the stars and the clouds
mhm,
and the rain throughout the course of the day, the month, the year. And within these cycles of life, right, it's actually our ancestors that give us a relationship and impart upon us a secure attachment relationship with nature. So that instead of feeling like we are separate to nature, we feel like we're a part of nature. And your ancestors can be your bloodline ancestors, but they're also your activist ancestors, your professional ancestors. Your ancestors can be of rock and stone and all the beings that are non-human that co-evolved alongside your human ancestors so that we could all be here today. Right? And your culture is food and language, and the ancient technology that weaves its way through all cultures is song and story and movement and silence.
mhm,
And these aspects are interwoven in all the rituals that mark the transition of time over the course of the months and the seasons and the cycles of a human over the course of a lifespan. Whether you're talking about weddings or bat mitzvahs or funerals or harvest, yeah,
mhm.
it's all song and story and movement and silence.
And many of us have even lost contact with a lot of those rituals.
Yes. And food and language.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then this gives rise, and then within all of this is secure attachment to the communal body, but also to my body, my own body. And when I have a fecund and sensuous and unmediated relationship with the natural world around me through my body, then I am embodied.
Mm.
And then I have access to secure attachment to pleasure and play and rest and work. And then
Wow.
lastly, yeah,
Okay,
and then
slow down, Linda. This is
yeah,
intense.
yeah,
This is really intense.
yeah,
Because we're so I'm just thinking
yeah,
so much of what you're saying,
yes,
I feel disconnect. I feel so disconnected
yes.
to a lot of what you're saying in the sense of I don't feel connected with my environment and with nature and all that stuff. When you're working with someone, how are you assessing them for this? What are you looking at?
When you look at it from a strengths-based perspective, for many of my complex developmental trauma clients, they have very minimal desire to be around other humans because our other humans are the source of the trauma and the terror and the betrayal and the distrust and the mistrust. And so we tend to, as mental health clinicians, have like a real hyperemphasis on the support people in your life and forming and forging relationships with other humans. And it can actually land as shaming and stigmatizing for many of our clients because they're not there. Like
Mhm.
it's just the last thing on earth, and us continuing to push it upon them, it's not helpful.
Mm.
And so, and you'll hear this with folks in recovery that they'll say, yeah, the first 10 years of my recovery, I spent living in nature and I had my plants and I had my pets and I listened to the wind and I collected flowers and I dried them and I made them into cards, right? And they're reclaiming this relationship in their own way
Wow.
to the other gateways of an expansive conceptualization of secure attachment. Yeah. And through each of these portals, we then connect to the last one, which is secure attachment to time.
Mm.
And most of us live with anxious attachment to time. And so this then all gives rise to a cosmology within which to place ourselves, our ancestors, that can be more expansive and helpful in a way that our hyper focus on the dyadic relationship may possibly not be.
When you say that many of us live in an anxious relationship to time, I can maybe
Yeah.
think about what that might mean, but say more about that.
Um, we want to have more of it. It becomes like an object that we grasp onto. We want to hold. We want to have more. Yeah, we're clinging to it. We're pushing against it. Yeah, that's the other. So we're like, I'm going to pretend that time doesn't exist at all.
Mm-hmm.
But really, that's a reflection of avoidance and avoiding having a healthy relationship with time within which we are also subject to and in interrelationship with time. We
So
will, we will get
what
old.
what does that mean? What does that look like? Does that mean, it feels like anxiety is at the bottom of that. Does that mean being more conscious of the present moment, appreciative of the present moment? You know, how do we do that?
Yeah, yeah. So this is part of the larger conversation about decolonization, right? So in my own healing journey, as I've developed more and more of a secure relationship with each of these other gates of attachment, I've been able to place myself in a more expansive cosmology. And I've surrounded myself with people and beings who live within and experience themselves within a larger cosmology.
Mm.
And yes, there's that mindfulness piece, but there's also that expanded awareness piece. Yeah. That when I'm in front of the mountains and the mountain ranges here in Alaska, I feel infinitely small in ways that are humbling and yet expansive. Because those mountains say to me that they have seen the rise and the fall of empires, and they have seen the comings and goings of ecosystems and glaciers. And they are big enough to hold all of my existential woes and worries and egoic concerns.
Mhm.
And they will be here long after any of us will ever be here. And that for me is very grounding. There's a depthfulness in that wisdom that's being offered.
When you were sharing about your journey on the in the beginning of that journey, before you started your intense healing process, your healing journey, is this the same Linda as that person? This Would that same Linda have been able to stand in front of those mountains and appreciate them and
Yeah.
feel them in the same way?
In a same but different way. There would have been
Mhm.
that sense of awe. Absolutely. I mean, that was that Linda back there back. I remember my first trip to Alaska. I had pitched a tent on the rear deck of a ferry, and the bioluminescence in the water increased the further north we went, and the air got cooler, and then I started to see mountains. And the way in which I breathed changed. The way in which I experienced myself changed with the shift in the temperature and the experience of awe and wonder that was around me.
Linda, man, it's intense. It's beautiful. I mean, half hour does not do this justice. So this is just a snippet of this presentation that you're going to do through the Wisdom Circle. So as we kind of wind down here, What is the work you're doing now? I mean, are you offering courses? You're working one-on-one or in groups or what?
So I offer online classes in somatics, the nervous system, the body, and trauma, attachment, neurodivergence. I teach through various folks as well as with Collectively Rooted, who work really closely with me. I also offer in-person retreats and workshops offering psychodrama structures, which I learned from Bessel van der Kolk and Leisha Sky, which they learned from Al Peso. I also combine that form with intramuscular ketamine, and I also combine that form with grief ritual in the tradition of Malidoma Some with co-facilitators who are trained in that form. Um, specifically Ale Blakely and their crew.
Mm.
So it's very much experiential, transformative, deeply meaningful work held within groups and within community.
For the people who are listening to this, who are undoubtedly going to be inspired by you and what you said today, in terms of therapists now, new therapists, even therapists with more experience, and in terms of people who are working with trauma, what would you say to them? What would you offer to them in terms of knowledge or education that's necessary to be working with people who have experienced trauma?
I would say keep doing your own work. Keep doing your own work. And because trauma is inescapability. So eventually, I encourage people to do the work around inescapable terror, because that is that which is at the heart of trauma. It's inescapability. And with inescapability comes terror. And we need to build our own capacity for terror, as well as find containers that can hold that terror so that it can move through us. And in this way, we can be with the stuckness as well as the terror that is in the nervous systems of so many of our clients that is outside of their awareness and possibly outside of ours, and yet is so much a part of the countertransferential material, and is also part of that which gets unlocked and connects us to a depth in our own nervous system
Mm.
and our own humanity.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then
Um,
for folks who are listening, who aren't necessarily therapists, I offer the words of William Stafford, who wrote the poem The Way It Is. There is a thread. There is a thread you follow. It goes among things that change, but it doesn't change.
mm, mm,
People, they wonder about what you are pursuing. You have to explain about the thread. While you hold it, you can't get lost. Tragedies happen, people get hurt or die. You suffer and get old, but nothing you do can stop time's unfolding. But you never let go. No, you don't ever let go of the thread.
mm.
Yeah. Keep following that thread, my friends. Keep following that thread.
Linda, awesome. Thank you so much for being here. We'll be in touch.
Okay.
Bye bye.